I stood in the hallway of Crestwood Academy, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, the sting of Ethan Caldwell's shove still burning my shoulder as his voice hissed a word I'd heard before but never with such venom, a racial slur that cut deeper than the bruise blooming on my cheek. I was Aisha Thompson, 16, a scholarship kid with a second-hand blazer and a dream my mom had framed on our apartment wall, but in that moment, I felt like nothing more than a target. The hallway wasn't empty. Logan Pierce and Ava Reed stood a few lockers away, their eyes flicking toward me before darting to the floor, their silence louder than any shout. No teachers stopped, no bells rang to save me, just Ethan's smirk as he adjusted his designer watch, muttering, "Stay in your lane, Aisha." My lip trembled, but I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered, "You've gone too far," my voice steady despite the tremor in my legs. Blood from a scratch on my cheek dripped onto the polished floor, a single red drop that seemed to scream the truth no one wanted to hear. I'd come to this elite Seattle school thinking my grades, my late nights with flashcards, my poetry scribbled in a worn journal could carve a path out of the struggles my mom faced as a nurse working double shifts. But Crestwood wasn't a ladder, it was a maze, designed to keep kids like me lost. I'd learned its rules early, not from the glossy handbook but from the way my history teacher, Ms. Langley, skipped over my raised hand, her smile reserved for students whose parents donated buildings. My essays came back bleeding red ink, no comments, just points shaved off, keeping my GPA just shy of the honor roll. In poetry club, my piece about my grandmother's hands weaving stories of resilience was rejected for being too political, while a white classmate's ode to a yacht got applause. I'd swallow the hurt, write another poem, and smile at lunch, hoping if I worked hard enough, I'd belong. But Ethan's shove changed everything. It wasn't just him, it was the system that let him strut through these halls like he owned them, the same system that made my presence a favor I should be grateful for. I staggered to the bathroom, my sneakers squeaking on the tiles, and leaned over the sink, watching the water swirl pink with my blood. My reflection stared back, bruised but unbroken, and I felt a fire kindle in my chest, not anger, not yet, but a resolve that whispered, "Enough." I wasn't going to shrink anymore. I left the sink running and walked to my locker, my jaw aching, my fingers trembling as I spun the combination. Inside, under a stack of notebooks, was a small black box, no bigger than a glasses case, that I hadn't touched in months. My dad, Colonel Darius Thompson, had given it to me before he retired to a cabin in Wyoming, 1,200 miles away. "Only if you're cornered, Aisha," he'd said, his voice rough with the weight of battles I didn't understand. "Not if you're scared, if you're trapped." Dad was the kind of man who checked exit signs in diners and taught me to memorize license plates just in case. I'd thought he was paranoid, that Crestwood slights were nothing a good grade couldn't fix. But as I opened the box and saw the sleek device inside, its single button pulsing faint green, I knew this wasn't a slight. This was a war. I didn't press it yet. My fingers hovered, my breath caught, because pressing that button meant pulling Dad back into a life he'd left, meant Mom's worried frown when she got home at midnight, meant admitting I couldn't fight this alone. But Ethan's smirk, Logan's silence, Ms. Langley's averted eyes, they were all bricks in a wall I was done climbing over. I slipped the device into my pocket and closed the locker, the click echoing like a promise. Back in class, I sat at the edge of the third row, my notebook open but untouched. Ms. Langley droned on about the Civil War, her voice syrupy as she praised Logan's half-baked answer while ignoring my hand. I wrote in my journal instead, a poem taking shape, "They build their castles on our silence, but whispers can crack stone." Writing was my refuge, each word a way to hold the hurt without letting it consume me. I'd started a private blog, Silent Sparks, where I typed out the things I couldn't say aloud, the way the lunch lady gave me smaller portions, the way my locker had been scratched with "Go Back" last month. No one read it, but it was mine, a place to breathe. That day, as Ethan leaned back in his chair, tossing a pen and catching it like he owned the air, I felt the device in my pocket, heavy with possibility. I didn't know what it would summon, but I knew I was done being invisible. The next morning, I walked into Crestwood with my chin high, the bruise on my cheek hidden under concealer Mom had helped apply. The halls buzzed with the usual chatter, kids planning weekend trips to Pike Place Market, teachers sipping coffee. But something felt different, like the air itself was watching me. I noticed the glances, quick and sharp, from students who'd never bothered to learn my name. A girl whispered to her friend, their eyes darting my way, and I felt a chill, not of fear, but of awareness. Ethan wasn't in first period, but his absence didn't feel like victory. I overheard Ava tell Logan, "She's making it a thing," her voice dripping with disdain, as if my bruise was an inconvenience. I kept walking, my backpack heavier with the camera I'd tucked into its strap, a gift from my cousin, Jamal, who worked in tech and called it a fun gadget. I hadn't used it before, but last night, I'd powered it on, its tiny lens blinking like an ally. Today, I adjusted the strap so it faced forward, recording every step I took. In English class, I set my backpack on my desk, the camera angled to catch Ms. Langley as she handed back essays. Mine had a B-, no comments, just a circled number that felt like a slap. When I asked why, she smiled thinly and said, "You need to focus on clarity, Aisha." Across the room, Ethan's friend Logan got an A, his paper riddled with typos I'd seen when he passed it around. I didn't argue. I let the camera see what I couldn't say. At lunch, I sat alone, my tray holding half the portion Ava got, and wrote in my journal, "They starve you slowly, not just food, but chances." That's when Riley Harper slid into the seat across from me, her purple-dyed hair catching the light, her eyes locking onto mine like she saw more than my bruise. "I know what happened," she said, her voice low but firm. "I saw Ethan yesterday. I'm new, but I'm not blind." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Riley leaned closer, her hoodie sleeve brushing the table. "My mom's a lawyer. She fights cases like this. You don't have to do this alone." I didn't trust her at first. Trust was a luxury I'd learned to ration. But Riley's gaze didn't waver, and she pulled out her phone, showing me a photo of her at a protest, holding a sign that read, "Truth Wins." She told me she transferred from a school in Portland, 170 miles south, after being bullied for calling out a teacher's bias. "I don't do silence," she said, and something in her voice cracked open a door I'd kept locked. I told her about the camera, the blog, the device in my pocket. Her eyes lit up, not with pity, but with a fire that matched mine. "We need more than eyes," she said. "We need a plan." That afternoon, in the library, we started what Riley called the Truth Club, just us and two other kids, a shy freshman, Malik, who'd been mocked for his accent, and a junior, Sophia, whose art projects were always too ethnic for the school show. We whispered our stories, each one a thread in a tapestry of slights Crestwood pretended didn't exist. Malik admitted he'd stopped raising his hand in math. Sophia showed us a sketch of a girl breaking chains. I read them a poem, "My voice is a spark, and sparks start fires." Riley suggested we encrypt the camera's feed, teaching me to code a simple app on my phone to secure the files. It felt like learning to fight, each line of code a punch I could throw without bleeding. We planned to record more. Ethan's taunts, teachers' dismissals, anything that showed Crestwood's polished mask hit a rotting core. I didn't tell them about the device yet, it felt too big, too final. But as we left the library, Riley squeezed my shoulder and said, "You're not just surviving, Aisha. You're building something." I walked home that evening, 2 miles through Seattle's chilly 45 degrees Fahrenheit air, my journal tucked under my arm, the camera still rolling. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. The device in my pocket pulsed faintly, a reminder that I had a general waiting if I needed him. But for now, I had my spark, and I was ready to let it burn. My name flashed across the cafeteria's digital bulletin board in bold red letters, Aisha Thompson, with "Charity Case" scrawled beside it, the words pulsing like a wound for all of Crestwood Academy to see, and I froze, my tray of lukewarm mac and cheese trembling in my hands as laughter erupted around me. It was Ethan Caldwell's doing, I knew it, his tech mogul father's donation probably paying for the screen itself, and as I stood there, for miles from Boston's bustling downtown, I felt the weight of every eye in the room, some smirking, others averting, none helping. I'm Aisha Thompson, 16, a black scholarship student who thought straight A's and poetry could outrun the slurs and shoves, but Ethan's latest stunt, a week after he bruised my cheek with a shove and a racial slur, proved Crestwood wasn't just a school, it was a battlefield. I wanted to run, to hide in the bathroom like I had last time, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I set my tray down, my heart hammering, and whispered to myself, not today. The fire I'd kindled after Ethan's attack, the one that led me to record his taunts with a hidden camera and start a truth club with Jada Miles and 2 other kids, flared brighter. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore, I was fighting for every kid Crestwood tried to erase. Ethan sat at the center table, his blonde hair catching the light, his smile sharp as he leaned back, watching the chaos he'd orchestrated. He wasn't just a bully. He was a conductor, wielding his family's wealth like a baton, his charm masking a cruelty that thrived on control. I'd seen glimpses of his insecurity, the way his jaw tightened when a teacher praised someone else, or how he'd linger after class, checking his phone for his dad's texts, as if approval was oxygen he couldn't find. But here, he was untouchable, his friends Logan Pierce and Ava Reed flanking him like loyal lieutenants, their laughter a shield. I'd recorded Logan mocking my ghetto accent in history class, even though I spoke clearer than he did, and Ava's fake sympathy when she accidentally spilled juice on my notebook. Ethan orchestrated it all, not because he hated me personally, I realized, but because I was a glitch in his perfect system, a black girl who dared to shine. My camera, hidden in my backpack strap, was rolling now, catching his smirk, the crowd's giggles, my name on that screen. I felt exposed, raw, but also alive, like every second I stood there was a brick in a wall I was building. I walked past Ethan's table, my chin high, ignoring the whispers. Jada Miles caught up to me near the exit, their purple hair tucked under a beanie, their eyes fierce. That was Ethan's work, wasn't it? They said, voice low. Jada, non-binary and new to Crestwood, had become my anchor since spotting my bruise last week. Their mom, a civil rights lawyer, had taught them to spot injustice like a hawk, and their own scars, being ostracized at a Maine school for challenging dress code bias, made them fearless. In our Truth Club, Jada was the strategist, teaching me to encrypt our camera feed with code they'd learned from a hacker cousin. We need to hit back, they said now, pulling me into a quiet corner. Not just record, broadcast. I hesitated, my fingers brushing the panic button in my pocket, the one my dad, Colonel Darius Thompson, gave me. I hadn't pressed it yet, but Jada's idea sparked something new, a secret student radio podcast, Crestwood Unmasked, to air our evidence anonymously. The thought thrilled me, but fear coiled in my gut. Ethan's reach was long, and I'd seen him charm teachers into ignoring his tardiness, his cheated tests. What would he do if we went public? We slipped into the library after lunch, joining Malik and Sophia, our Truth Club allies. Malik, a freshman with a soft Somali accent, clutched a sketchbook where he drew superheroes who looked like him, something Crestwood's art teacher called too niche. Sophia, a junior, had transferred after her old school ignored her complaints about racist graffiti. We sat at a back table, the air thick with our shared defiance. Jada pitched the podcast, suggesting we use a spare AV room and their cousin's software to stream it on a hidden frequency only students could find. We'll play your clips, Aisha, Jada said. Ethan's voice, Ms. Langley's bias, all of it. Malik's eyes widened, but he nodded, whispering, I want to help. Sophia offered to design a logo, her fingers already sketching a microphone breaking chains. I read them a poem I'd written last night. They paint their lies on our skin, but truth is a blade that cuts clean. My voice shook, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen. Jada grinned, saying, that's our intro. I felt a surge of hope, but also dread. Ethan wouldn't just let this slide. That afternoon, drama escalated when I found my poetry journal missing from my locker, replaced with a note, "Keep quiet, or you'll regret it." My stomach dropped, each word a dagger. Ethan's handwriting, I was sure, his confidence chilling. My poems weren't just words, they were my heart, my shield. Every late night I'd stayed up dreaming of a world that saw me. I told Jada, who cursed under their breath, that freak's playing dirty. We searched the school, my panic rising, until Malik spotted pages taped to a courtyard mural, a public art piece celebrating diversity. My poems were defaced with slurs, the mural's black faces scratched out. Students gathered, some laughing, others silent, and I felt like I was back in the cafeteria, exposed. But then Ms. Carter, a young math teacher who'd always seemed nervous, stepped forward, tearing the pages down. "This isn't right," she said, her voice shaking, handing me the crumpled sheets. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of guilt. She'd ignored my raised hand before, but now she saw me. I clutched the pages, my heart a storm of anger and gratitude. Ms. Carter's act shifted something in me. She wasn't an ally yet, but she was proof the system could crack. I wrote in my blog, "Silent Sparks," that night, my fingers flying. They tried to erase my words, but even torn pages speak. Jada and I met in the AV room, setting up the podcast. We recorded a test episode, my voice narrating a clip of Ethan saying, "She's just here for the quota," while Ms. Langley chuckled. Jada added music, a low beat that felt like a heartbeat. We didn't broadcast yet, but the act felt like rebellion. I mentored Malik after, helping him write his first poem for the podcast, his shy smile worth every risk. But Ethan wasn't done. The next day, he cornered me in a stairwell, his charm gone, his eyes cold. "You think you're smart, Aisha? Keep pushing, and I'll make sure you're out of here." His voice was low, but I saw fear in his stance. He wasn't just protecting his status, he was guarding a fragile ego, terrified of losing his throne. I didn't flinch, saying, "I'm not the one who's scared." He stepped closer, but footsteps above made him back off, his smirk returning like a mask. I walked away, my pulse racing, the panic button heavy in my pocket. I hadn't pressed it, but Ethan's threat made it tempting. At home, I called Mom, her voice tired from her hospital shift. "I'm fighting, Mom," I said, tears pricking. "I just don't know how big this gets." She paused, then said, "You're my spark, Aisha. Don't let them dim you." Her words anchored me, but as I lay in bed, the weight of Ethan's power, Crestwood's silence, and my own defiance pressed down. I opened my blog, typing, "They think they can break me, but I'm not alone." Jada texted me a podcast script, Malik sent a sketch, Sophia shared a logo. The Truth Club was growing, but so was the storm. Tomorrow, we'd test the broadcast, and I knew Ethan would hear it. The mural, the note, the screen, they were warnings. What came next would be war. And as I closed my eyes, my finger brushed the button, whispering, "Not yet, but soon." My face stared back at me from every computer screen in Crestwood Academy's tech lab, a photo of me from last week's poetry club, my bruise barely hidden, with the caption, "Quota Queen," flashing in neon green, and I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, as students snickered and Ethan Caldwell leaned against the doorframe, his grin a blade slicing through my resolve. I'm Aisha Thompson, 16, a black scholarship student who thought I could fight racism with a hidden camera and a secret podcast, but Ethan's latest attack, hacking the school's website to humiliate me, felt like a punch I couldn't dodge. My hands shook, clutching my backpack where the camera still recorded, its lens catching the glow of my shame on those screens. I wanted to scream, to smash every monitor, but Jada Miles, my Truth Club ally, grabbed my arm, their voice steady. "Don't let him win, Aisha." The fire I'd nurtured since Ethan's first shove, the one that fueled our Crestwood Unmasked podcast and my blog, Silent Sparks, flickered but didn't die. I whispered, "He's not winning," my voice raw, and turned away, knowing this wasn't just about me, it was about every kid Crestwood silenced, and I was done letting their laughter bury us. Ethan wasn't just a bully, he was a storm, his privilege a wind that bent everyone around him. I'd seen his charm, the way he'd flash a smile at Ms. Langley to dodge homework deadlines, but I'd also caught his panic when his father's name came up in class, his eyes darting like he was running from a shadow. He needed Crestwood to worship him, to prove he was more than a tech mogul's son coasting on donations. Humiliating me wasn't personal, it was strategy, a way to keep the system's hierarchy intact. But I'd recorded his slurs, Ms. Langley's chuckles, and a counselor's dismissal of my complaints, and our podcast's test episode, aired last night on a hidden frequency, had reached a dozen students. Malik, our freshman ally, texted me at midnight, saying, "Your poem made me cry, Aisha." Sophia, our junior artist, said her logo was trending in group chats. Jada, whose coding kept our files safe, believed we could go bigger, but Ethan's hack raised the stakes. He wasn't just taunting me, he was warning me to stop. In the hallway, Jada pulled me aside, their purple beanie slipping as they whispered, "We need to trace that hack." Jada's past, being shunned in Maine for challenging bias, made them fearless, but I saw worry in their eyes, a flicker of the kid who'd lost friends for speaking up. They'd taught me to code, given me a shield, and now they pitched a new plan, hack back, not to destroy, but to replace Ethan's message with our podcast link. I hesitated, my fingers brushing the panic button in my pocket, the one Dad gave me. I hadn't pressed it, but Ethan's escalation made me wonder if I should. "It's risky," I said, my voice tight. Jada nodded. "So is staying quiet." We ducked into the AV room, where Malik and Sophia waited, their faces lit by a laptop screen. Malik showed me a new sketch, a girl with my braids holding a microphone like a torch. "For the podcast," he said shyly. I hugged him, my throat tight, realizing I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was his mentor, his hope. Sophia shared a story she hadn't told before. Her old school ignored a petition she wrote about racist dress code rules. "I thought I was alone," she said, her voice cracking. "Then I heard your poem, Aisha. I read them a new one, they hack our names, but our voices reboot stronger." We planned the counter-hack, Jada's fingers flying over keys, but my mind was on Ethan. I'd overheard him in the stairwell yesterday, telling Logan, "My dad says scholarships like hers cost us leverage." His cruelty wasn't random, it was tied to his father's deals, maybe even the $10 million gym Crestwood was building. I typed it in my blog, "They don't just hate us, they profit from us." That afternoon, drama spiked when Ms. Carter, the math teacher who'd saved my poems from the defaced mural, pulled me aside. "I know about the podcast," she whispered, her eyes nervous. "I listened last night. I'm sorry I didn't act sooner." She handed me a USB drive. "Grade records. They've been fudging scholarship kids' scores for years." Her guilt was raw, a teacher trapped in a system she'd upheld too long. I clutched the drive, my heart racing, proof, real proof, but also danger. The USB burned in my pocket as I sat through English class, Ms. Langley praising Ava's essay while my A paper had no feedback. I recorded it, my camera catching Ava's smirk, Ethan's nod. After class, a parent-teacher meeting turned chaotic when Malik's mom, a bus driver, confronted Principal Vaughn about the website hack. "My son's scared to come to school," she shouted, her voice echoing in the hall. Vaughn's smooth reply, "We're investigating," felt like a slap, but Ms. Carter stepped in, saying, "It's not just one incident. It's a pattern." Parents murmured, some nodding, others glaring at me like I'd caused the mess. I felt exposed, but Malik's mom met my eyes, her nod a silent, "Keep going." I wrote in my journal, "Their anger is a mirror, they see us now." That night, Jada and I launched the counter-hack, replacing "Quota Queen" with a podcast link in my poem, "I am not your shadow, I am light." By morning, 50 students had listened, but Ethan was waiting. He ambushed me in the cafeteria, his voice low, his charm a mask for rage. "You're playing a game you can't win, Aisha," he said, his hand gripping a chair so tight his knuckles whitened. I saw his fear again, the boy who needed his father's empire to feel big, but his threat chilled me. "My dad knows people. You'll be gone before prom." I stood my ground, saying, "I'm not the one hiding." He laughed, but it was hollow, and as he walked away, I noticed his phone buzz, a text he read with a frown. His father, maybe, pulling strings I couldn't see. I told Jada, who cursed, "Dang, he's desperate." We aired a new podcast episode, playing Ms. Carter's grade data and Malik's poem about fear. Sophia painted a mural design for the school's blank wall, a girl breaking chains, but Vaughn rejected it, calling it divisive. The rejection stung, but 100 students listened to our podcast by lunch, some whispering, "I heard you," as I passed. I mentored Malik after school, helping him record his poem, his voice growing bolder. "You're like my sister," he said, and I nearly cried, the weight of his trust grounding me. But fear crept in, Ethan's threat, Vaughn's dismissal, the USB's secrets. I called Mom, her voice weary. "I'm proud, Aisha, but be careful," she said. I didn't tell her about the button, but I held it that night, its green pulse a lifeline. My blog entry read, "They think they've trapped us, but traps break when you push back." Jada texted, "Podcasts at 200 listens. Ready for more?" I was, but Ethan's next move came faster. At dawn, my phone buzzed with an email from Vaughn, "Disciplinary hearing tomorrow. Alleged misconduct." My heart stopped. They were moving to expel me, just as Ethan promised. I stared at the button, my finger trembling, and whispered, "Dad, I need you now." I pressed it, the light turning solid green, and the world shifted, a general's war about to begin. I stood in the AV room at Crestwood Academy, my heart racing as Jada Miles hit publish on our podcast, Crestwood Unmasked, and my voice, woven with a poem I'd written at midnight, "I am not your shadow, I am light," poured through the encrypted stream, exposing Ethan Caldwell's slurs, Ms. Langley's bias, and Principal Vaughn's plan to expel me, and I knew, at 16, a black scholarship girl in Boston, I just lit a match in a room full of secrets. The disciplinary email from Vaughn, accusing me of misconduct, still burned in my mind, but pressing the panic button last night, its green light signaling my dad, Colonel Darius Thompson, had shifted something inside me. Fear was still there, but hope was louder. Jada, their purple beanie askew, grinned, saying, "This is gonna shake them, Aisha." Our Truth Club, Malik, Sophia, and now Ms. Carter's quiet support, had grown from whispers to a roar, and as the podcast hit 500 listens by 7:00 a.m., I felt like I was standing on a cliff, not falling, but ready to soar. Ethan's latest attack, hacking the school website to brand me, quote, a queen, had meant to crush me, but every download, every student's nod in the hall, told me he'd miscalculated. I wasn't just fighting for my place at Crestwood, I was fighting for every kid who'd been told to shrink, and their eyes, meeting mine, said they were watching. The school buzzed by second period, phones lighting up with our podcast link, shared in group chats, whispered in bathrooms. Ethan sat in history class, his jaw tight, his usual smirk gone as Logan Pierce muttered, "Dude, they're playing it everywhere." I'd recorded Ethan saying, "She's here for the quota," and Ms. Langley's chuckle, now echoing through earbuds across Crestwood. I saw his fear, not just of exposure, but of losing the throne he'd built on his father's tech empire. Ethan wasn't a cartoon villain, he was a boy drowning in expectations, his dad's $10 million gym donation a leash he wore like a crown. I'd overheard him once, pleading on the phone, "Dad, I'm handling it," his voice cracking, and I realized his cruelty was a performance, a way to prove he deserved the Caldwell name. But it didn't excuse him, it made him dangerous, because a scared king fights dirtiest. My camera, hidden in my backpack, caught him now, his eyes darting to me, not with arrogance, but with something new, desperation. I wrote in my journal, "He's not unbreakable, just loud," and the thought steadied me, even as Vaughn's hearing loomed. Jada and I met in the library at lunch. Malik and Sophia huddled close, their faces alight. Malik showed me a poem he'd recorded for the next episode, his voice no longer shy. "They call my accent wrong, but it carries my home." Sophia unveiled a digital poster for our podcast, a girl with my braids shattering a glass ceiling, shared on social media with #Justice for Aisha. "It's at 2,000 listens," Jada said, "they're coding keeping our stream untraceable." But Ethan struck back. By noon, the school's Wi-Fi crashed, a deliberate blackout, and a new message appeared on classroom projectors: "Aisha lies." My stomach twisted, but a mess. Carter, the math teacher who'd given me the grade-fudging USB, stood up in her class, saying, "This is harassment, not a prank." Her voice shook, but her defiance rippled, students whispering her words. I typed in my blog, "Silent sparks, they cut the signal, but truth doesn't need Wi-Fi." The blackout only fueled the fire. Students downloaded the podcast offline, sharing it like contraband, and by 3 p.m., it hit 10,000 listens, #Justice for Aisha trending citywide. The drama escalated when I was called to Vaughn's office, not for the hearing, but for a preliminary talk. Ethan was there, his father, Mr. Caldwell, beside him, a man whose suit screamed power, his eyes cold. Vaughn, all smiles, said, "Aisha, this podcast is disruptive. Let's resolve this quietly." Ethan's gaze was smug, but his hands fidgeted, betraying nerves. Mr. Caldwell added, "My son's future isn't a game for your activism." The word stung, but I saw Ethan flinch, as if his dad's defense was a chain, not a shield. I said, "I'm telling the truth," my voice steady despite my racing pulse. Vaughn's smile faltered, and I knew the USB in my pocket, with its proof of grade manipulation, was a bomb they didn't expect. I left, my head high, but Ethan followed, his voice low, "You're digging your own grave, Aisha." I turned, saying, "Or yours," and saw his mask slip, fear raw before he walked away. I wrote, "He's not a god, just a boy who's scared of mirrors." That evening, I spoke at a community vigil outside Crestwood, 3 miles from Boston Common, organized by Malik's mom and other parents. The 50 degrees Fahrenheit air was crisp, candles flickering as I read a poem. "They dim our light, but we burn brighter together." Faces in the crowd, students, neighbors, even a local barista who'd heard the podcast, nodded, their signs reading, "We see you, Aisha." A stranger, an older black woman, hugged me, whispering, "You're my daughter's hero." My throat tightened, not with triumph, but with responsibility. Jada live-streamed the vigil, 5,000 viewers joining online, and Sophia's poster went viral, shared by a Boston artist with 1 million followers. But fear lingered, Ethan's threat, Vaughn's hearing, Mr. Caldwell's glare. I called Mom, her voice weary from her shift. "You're changing things, Aisha," she said, "but I'm scared for you." I didn't mention the button, already pressed, but I felt Dad's presence, 1,200 miles away, like a shield. The next morning, a new ally emerged. Mr. Nguyen, a quiet science teacher, emailed me anonymously, leaking emails between Vaughn and Mr. Caldwell about streamlining scholarships to favor donor kids. "I should have spoken sooner," he wrote, his guilt echoing Ms. Carter's. I shared it with Jada, who cursed, "Dang, it's bigger than we thought." We added the emails to our next podcast, Malik narrating, his voice fierce. Sophia proposed a truth wall at school, where students could post anonymous stories, but Vaughn banned it, calling it vandalism. The ban backfired, students taped notes in bathrooms, I was called a slur too, my grades were lowered, and the podcast hit 50,000 listens. Ethan's desperation grew. I caught him arguing with Logan, his voice cracking, "If I go down, you're all coming with me." Logan's silence was telling, Ethan's empire was cracking. I mentored Malik that afternoon, helping him design a truth wall poster, his gratitude, "You make me brave, Aisha," anchoring me. But the storm peaked when Agent Laura Chen from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division called my burner phone, a number Jada had set up. "Your podcast aligns with complaints we've had for years," she said. "We're investigating Crestwood." My heart soared, but fear followed. Investigations meant exposure, and Ethan's father wouldn't go quietly. I wrote, "Truth is a wave, but waves can drown you." At school, students wore #JusticeForAisha pins, some made by Sophia, but Ethan's allies spread rumors I'd faked the recordings. A junior, inspired by the vigil, told me, "I stayed because of you," echoing Malik's words, and I felt the weight of their trust. That night, Jada and I planned a live podcast at the vigil's follow-up rally, but an email from Vaughn stopped me cold. Hearing moved up. Immediate suspension pending. My hands shook, the button's green light now a lifeline. I called Dad's number, his voice calm but steel, "We're here, Aisha. Hold the line." I hung up, knowing tomorrow wasn't just a hearing, it was coming for Crestwood's soul, and Ethan's mask, my first target. I stood in Crestwood Academy's auditorium, my hands steady on the podium, the microphone no longer a barrier but a bridge, as I faced a crowd of students, parents, and teachers, their faces lit by the amber glow of a Boston evening, knowing that at 16, a black scholarship girl, Aisha Thompson, had turned a school's silence into a symphony of truth. Federal agents had stormed Crestwood at 8:00 a.m., their SUVs clogging the street under a 40 degrees Fahrenheit sky, wielding warrants sparked by our podcast, Crestwood Unmasked, and the panic button I'd pressed, calling my dad, Colonel Darius Thompson, to unravel a system that thrived on racism. Ethan Caldwell's slurs, Ms. Langley's bias, and Principal Vaughn's expulsion plot, exposed to 50,000 listeners, had toppled a tower of privilege, with #JusticeForAisha echoing nationwide. Ethan, once untouchable, was suspended, his father's tech empire crumbling under DOJ scrutiny, but as I spoke, my poem, "I Am Light, Not Shadow," ringing in my heart, I felt not victory, but a profound duty to rebuild what racism had broken, for every kid who'd whispered their pain in Crestwood's halls. The raids hit like lightning, striking Vaughn's office, Mr. Caldwell's headquarters 4 miles away, and City Hall, where $5 million in scholarships had been siphoned to fund a $10 million gym. Jada Miles, my Truth Club anchor, stood beside me in the hallway, their purple beanie a beacon, their eyes shining with awe. "You broke the machine, Aisha," they said, their voice cracking, revealing the weight they carried as a non-binary kid who'd fought bias in Maine. Malik, our freshman poet, clutched his sketchbook, whispering, "No more Ethan," while Sophia, our junior artist, pointed to her mural design on protest signs, "We see you, Aisha." The school was a storm. Students sharing our podcast offline, teachers like Ms. Langley avoiding my gaze, the Wi-Fi still glitching from Ethan's failed blackout. I typed in my blog, "Silent sparks, they built walls, but we grew roots." Ethan's downfall was stark. I saw him outside, his blonde hair limp, his phone buzzing with hate he'd once dished out, now memed across Boston. He wasn't evil, just a boy whose fear of failing his father fueled his cruelty, a fear I'd heard in his cracked voice begging, "Dad, I fixed it." But his empire fell, and I wrote, he shattered his own crown. Rebuilding began in a conference room, once Vaughn's throne, now ours. I led a student council with Jada, Malik, and Sophia, our pens carving new rules, equity audits for grades, a hotline for reports, mandatory bias training. Interim Principal Ms. Hayes, her eyes heavy with past complicity, approved our Truth Summit, a live-streamed event to amplify voices. I launched a poetry contest, my journal's words inspiring entries like Malik's, "My voice is my home." Sophia's mural, "A Girl Breaking Chains," adorned the cafeteria, and Jada's app let students vote on policies. Malik suggested a peer mentorship program, his shy smile saying I'd shown him how. I felt grounded, not weighed down, my blazer a badge of resilience. The summit, 3 miles from Fenway Park, drew 300 parents, activists, kids, my poem ringing out, "We rewrite silence with truth." Mom, in her nurse's scrubs, cried, whispering, my spark, her pride healing every bruise. Sophia's mural trended online, Jada's app hit 5,000 downloads, and Malik mentored a new freshman, his confidence my mirror. Crestwood's collapse wasn't enough, justice meant change. Vaughn resigned, her letter smudged, a white flag. Ethan, Logan, and Ava vanished, their trophies removed, while Mr. Caldwell faced fraud charges, his gym deal voided. Ms. Carter testified to the DOJ, her voice firm, and Mr. Nguyen's leaked emails exposed a decade of scholarship cuts. Agent Laura Chen said, "Your evidence rewrote the rules, Aisha," her words a crown I didn't seek. I spoke at a Providence school, 50 miles south, sharing my story, while Jada started a coding camp, teaching kids like Malik to build justice apps. Sophia's murals spread to Hartford, 100 miles west, her art a beacon. My GPA, now 4.0, reflected truth, and I was named council president, voted by peers who'd posted their truths on bathroom walls. A Boston publisher offered a book deal for Silent Sparks, my poems a voice for the unseen. I wrote, "We don't just survive, we shape." The halls changed, lockers gleamed, signs read, "Your voice matters," teachers called on every hand. Ms. Hayes kept her door open, a rebuke to Vaughn's secrecy. At the summit's close, I faced the crowd, my voice steady, "This isn't the end, it's ours to write." They roared, not with anger, but promise. Dad, in the back, his eyes wet, nodded, saying without words, "You led." Jada grinned, we flipped the script, while Mom hugged me, Lena, a freshman, waving shyly. Lena's poem, sent to me later, echoed mine, and I mentored her, knowing she'd carry the spark. I stood by a window, the sun rising over Boston, and reflected on my journey. I'd learned silence is a choice, but truth is a fire that grows when shared. Courage isn't loud, it's standing when you're shaking, recording one more clip, speaking when no one listens. Racism thrives in shadows, but allies like Jada, evidence like my camera, and faith like Mom's love light the way. I'd been scared, bruised, but never alone, and that was my strength. I turn to you, reader, my heart open. If you faced racism at school, a power reversal twist, or an authority figure's silence, how would you approach it to achieve the best outcome? Would you whisper your truth, find your Jada, or press your own panic button? I typed my final blog post, "We are the dawn they couldn't dim." Lena's voice, Malik's sketches, Sophia's murals, Jada's code, they were my legacy, a light for every silenced spark, and I'd keep speaking, because their dawn, like mine, was just beginning.